Hey, can everybody see that?
Yep, looks good.
All right. So my name is Lydia Yoder, and my capstone is on developing and evaluating a pedestrian risk dashboard for local government. Allegheny County, Pennsylvania will be the focus of this case study. And as a brief personal introduction, I have a background working in environmental nonprofit organizations in Pittsburgh, and I'm excited to start looking for GIS work in the new year. So first, a little background about the big picture issue behind this study. Walking is a primary mode of transportation for many people, not just in cities, but also in suburbs and rural communities. However, many pedestrians cannot safely access essential goods and services. We often encounter infrastructure issues like overgrown sidewalks, faded crosswalks, and unsheltered bus stops along high-speed roadways. These are not just inconveniences. Infrastructure like this increases the likelihood of a crash. Pedestrian deaths in the US have been increasing for more than a decade, and they reached a 40-year high in 2022, as you can see in this graph. Nationally, the victims of vehicle pedestrian crashes are disproportionately poor and people of color. And as income inequality increases, poor people who often don't have access to personal vehicles have been priced out of walkable cities and forced to navigate car-centric suburbs on foot. Decades of research from the US Department of Transportation show that many of these deaths could be prevented by implementing infrastructure solutions that are proven to reduce collisions. Roadways in your community might look like the photo on the left, where most of the space is allocated to vehicles. If your local government is designing roadways intentionally to accommodate a variety of transportation modes, maybe some of the streets look more like the photo on the right, where infrastructure provides visibility and refuge for pedestrians. Local governments are often responsible for addressing these issues, but some don't know where to begin. There are barriers like fragmented data and a lack of resources to determine what areas are the most dangerous for pedestrians so they can effectively prioritize project planning. To address these concerns, the research question of this study is, how can the geographic distribution of pedestrian crash risk be communicated effectively to decision makers in local government? The objectives used to examine this, what's that? Oh. The objectives used to examine this are to first develop a pedestrian risk visualization and dashboard for Allegheny County, PA as a case study, and then to conduct user testing of the dashboard with local government personnel to evaluate its usability and utility. This approach was grounded in previous research from three overarching topics: mapping crash risk, the use of dashboards in local government, and user evaluation. There are many studies on modeling crash patterns. A guide from the US Department of Transportation synthesizing that research was particularly instructive. It recommended using a combination of crash datasets and datasets representing proxies for pedestrian exposure and crash risk to get the best estimation of where crashes are likely to happen. This is because crash datasets, of course, only use reported crashes. And some estimates say that as many as half of pedestrian crashes go unreported. For that reason, crash prediction models should be fortified with additional variables. Reading through research on mapping crash risk, I found that most of it was siloed from applied use cases. I found only 2 studies on crash patterns that explicitly considered how practical their visualizations were for transportation planning, and their user evaluations were limited to quantitative methods. Researchers looking at dashboards for local government, such as the Dublin dashboard shown in the center here, generally found that these tools can help facilitate planning. But again, there were many missed opportunities for user evaluation. To address that gap, in this research, I incorporated elements from a study on user-centered design and evaluation written by 2 former Penn State geography faculty, Jonathan Nelson and Alan McEachern. So before I get into the methodology, I want to provide the definition of pedestrian risk used in this study. It's the estimated likelihood of a pedestrian-involved crash to occur in a given location as a function of one or more indicators. So now we have a definition and we can get into the methodology. The methodology includes 3 parts. First, modeling pedestrian risk, then building a geovisual dashboard, then facilitating user evaluation. So starting with part 1, to model pedestrian risk, the first step was to gather data. The data sets I selected for the study matched 2 criteria. They aligned with the US DOT guide for assessing pedestrian risk, and they were available locally as open data. A data set of reported pedestrian crashes was the most important indicator. Previous research has identified past crashes as the best predictor of future crashes. And like I previously mentioned, to fortify the model, we use additional indicators. So I used population, households without vehicles, zoning types, bus stop use, and street speed and type. Now, I won't have time to go into the details of why each data set was chosen, but essentially each of these is a proxy for pedestrian exposure or crash risk. So each of the data sets was used in a raster overlay analysis. This required a variety of pre-processing steps for each data set. Then each layer was rasterized and standardized on a common scale. For point data sets, kernel density estimation was used to create a continuous raster surface. Next, a forest-based regression was used to assess the importance of each variable for predicting pedestrian crashes. Then weights were applied to each standardized and rasterized variable layer proportional to the importance values from the forest-based regression. Those weighted layers were summed, resulting in an estimated pedestrian risk raster. This raster had a resolution of 100 feet, which is about half the length of a small city block, so that values at intersections at either end of the block could be easily differentiated. Next, we'll look at part 2 of the methodology, building a geovisual dashboard. So I used a scenario-based design approach to create a narrative about an imagined persona and use case. The imagined user was Frank, a borough council member and chairman of the streets department in an unnamed Allegheny County borough. I then used that narrative to form a set of claims about the major features and functions of the dashboard. And with a checklist of those claims, I developed the dashboard through Esri's ArcGIS Experience Builder. So the last part of the methodology is facilitating user evaluation. First, I designed the evaluation tools. This included a set of test tasks and a survey via Esri's Survey 123, including an assessment based on the tasks, open-ended qualitative questions, and Likert scale usability and utility questions. Next, I sent requests for participation to employees of local municipal governments throughout Allegheny County. Of the county's 130 municipalities, I prioritized 30 with the highest levels of pedestrian risk, and those with employee contact info available on the web. And then I facilitated the user testing. So now for the results. We'll start with the pedestrian risk visualization. So these snapshots show how the overlay raster was symbolized at 3 different scales. The layer directly resulting from the overlay analysis was defined as a community scale visualization with the appearance of a hotspot map. Zonal statistics were used to aggregate risk values by municipality and to restrict the risk values to each street segment, which produced municipal scale and street scale visualizations. So next I'll give an overview of the results of the dashboard development. So the site includes 5 pages. The landing page is the project overview, which orients the user to the purpose of the project with a short narrative. The pedestrian risk map page is an interactive map of Allegheny County with a pedestrian risk visualization at 3 scales. Basic map tools allow the user to pan, zoom, and search. A labeled layer and legend button opens to allow the user to toggle on and off different layers, including reported crashes and municipal boundaries. To the left of the map, a panel presents a definition of pedestrian risk, a short description of how risk is estimated, and information about why the project uses estimated pedestrian risk rather than only reported crashes. Additionally, a print and save button opens to a window which allows the user to create a custom pedestrian risk map that can be saved as a PDF or printed. The Crash Data Explorer centers on a map of reported crashes from 2014 to 2023 in Allegheny County. Using coordinated views, the crash data shown on the map can be filtered by variables and simultaneously shown in a bar chart and detail table. The user can view crashes on the map as points or aggregations via graduated symbols. The user's feedback survey page provides instructions for user evaluation and an embedded user survey. And lastly, there's a data and methods page for users who just want some more information. Finally, the results of the user evaluation. So 10 municipal government employees in Allegheny County completed the user evaluation within a 2-week testing period. The participants included 3 employees from the city of Pittsburgh, 5 from inner ring suburbs, 1 from an outer ring suburb, and 1 from a rural municipality on the edge of the county. The roles of participants included planners, administrative employees, public safety employees, a traffic engineer, and others. I'll start by summarizing a few major themes of the qualitative responses. Participants generally found the dashboard to be a practical tool for exploratory planning. They said it confirmed assumptions about high-risk areas for pedestrians, and they also gained some new insights on pedestrian risk. Participants also said they could see potential applications in their municipal operations. Participant feedback diverged on a few points, such as the utility of specific map layers, such as and trust in the accuracy of the risk estimation and usability of the Crash Data Explorer. Looking at responses to task questions, a majority of participants correctly or partially correctly responded to the 4 questions. Generally, users were more successful with tasks that could be completed by viewing the pedestrian risk map instead of the Crash Data Explorer. On the Likert scale questions, users overwhelmingly responded positively. All respondents agreed or strongly agreed that the dashboard could help them make informed decisions about infrastructure for pedestrian safety, that they could see themselves using the dashboard in their work, and that they found the dashboard easy to use overall. 7 out of 10 participants agreed or strongly agreed that the dashboard gave them new insights about where pedestrians face the greatest risk in Allegheny County, and 3 were neutral. The question with the most variation in responses was on whether the participants trusted the map's representation of pedestrian risk. Half of the respondents agreed or strongly agreed, 3 were neutral, 1 disagreed, and 1 strongly disagreed. Participant opinion varied somewhat on the ease of using the map functions like filtering, selecting, zooming, and panning. So local governments often bear the burden of addressing unsafe conditions for pedestrians, but they often lack the resources to effectively prioritize their infrastructure interventions. The pedestrian risk dashboard was designed to address this need in Allegheny County as a case study, and more broadly examined how the geographic distribution of pedestrian risk could be conveyed to decision makers in local government. A clear pattern in survey responses demonstrated the disparity in local government planning resources between the urban center of Allegheny County and suburban and rural communities. While participants from the city of Pittsburgh were used to prioritizing street improvements based on crash data, rural and suburban participants were not. Likewise, participants who had less access to crash data generally showed more enthusiastic interest in using the dashboard, while City of Pittsburgh employees were able to use their experience to offer more constructive criticism. It was clear that all of these municipalities desired tools and resources to more effectively prioritize planning, and many had excellent ideas for improving the pedestrian risk visualization and dashboard. Several of the participants told me that they're already using the pedestrian risk dashboard in their planning work. And my hope is that with the visualizations and tools available in the dashboard, local government officials in Allegheny County will be motivated and informed to make effective decisions about pedestrian safety in their communities. And meanwhile, their valuable contributions to the project through user evaluation will be used to refine the dashboard. So thanks so much for listening. I want to give a huge thank you to all the professors and peers who have provided excellent feedback throughout the MGIS program as I was putting together the building blocks of this capstone. And the biggest thank you to Marcella for your encouragement and really helping me to focus in on my objectives in the final stretch. I'm going to put a link to the dashboard in the chat if you want to check it out. I'll close up my screen share here, and then what questions do you have?
All right. Thank you, Lydia. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Looks like you've got something in the chat already to respond to.
Okay, so Michelle says, will public input play any role in identifying and addressing high-risk pedestrian areas? In other words, have you thought about how a municipality might incorporate community feedback effectively? Yeah, I've definitely thought about that. So an interesting thing just from mostly casual conversation with the participants is that, or the user participants, is that like most of them are using public input currently to make decisions about where they're like adding crosswalks or doing any kind of pedestrian infrastructure interventions. And the ones that are using public input are mostly not using crash data. But I have thought about like how this dashboard could be used by the public, and if like some sort of comment function could be added where people can add a dot on the map and say like, I was almost run over here, and you know, whatever it is they want to say. I don't know what that looks like with ArcGIS Experience Builder, because as far as I know, they don't offer that function, but yeah, definitely something I think about. Fritz said, a very practical project with real world application. Great to see such a detailed usability study with the dashboard development. Perhaps beyond the scope of your dashboard, did you consider inviting residents from the broader community? Residents could likely find this information useful too. Yes, so similar to the last question from Michelle, there's residents are really interested in this issue right now of pedestrian safety because the rate of increase of pedestrian deaths has just exploded, and so there is a lot of motivation and energy around improving streets for pedestrian safety. So I definitely think there's room for that here, and I hope that if this becomes something that local municipalities can adopt, that we can like figure out some way to work in community input.
Getting at the trust in the map question.
Yes.
I saw that your model had a number of different layers involved in the calculation of the risk, and they had different weights. I'm assuming those weights came from your research.
The weights were, so most of the weights were chosen based on the results of the regression analysis. So the forest-based regression produces like importance percentages, and I proportionally assign the weights based on that to the explanatory variables. So bus stop use, population, households without vehicles, and two others that I'm forgetting at the moment. But then the percentage, the weighting percentage for pedestrian crashes, I assigned at 50%, just looking at what other researchers have done with that, because I was using it as the independent variable for the forest-based regression, as kind of like a representative of like of crashes in general, not just past crashes. I couldn't get an importance percentage for that because it was the independent variable. So that's a part of the analysis that I would love to work on more and kind of solidify as I continue to work on the dashboard.
Yeah. Yeah. It might be nice to give some of those subject matter experts some sort
Definitely.
of way to provide their feedback too. Okay.
Yeah,
In the
one
interest of,
study I looked at did all their weighting was based on subject matter experts. So yeah.
yeah. Okay. Well, again, great job. We could probably have lots more questions, but we want to move along so we get done today. All right. Just one thing I've neglected to mention, please throw your email address in the chat box in case folks do want to follow up with you afterwards with more questions. Okay, that brings us to our second presenter, Evan Humphreys. Evan, are you ready to go?
Yes, just give me a moment to share my screen. All right, are we seeing the screen here, everybody?
Yeah,
Good.
looks good.
Okay, I'll get started. I'm Evan Humphreys, and my advisor was Dr. Fritz Kessler. This is my capstone presentation for the fall term. It's titled Walkability and Its Consequences on Obesity in the Built Environment, a focus on Cleveland, Ohio. A little background about me. I live in Cleveland, Ohio. I have worked in GIS for about 12 years now, but about a year ago, we moved to Cleveland from Columbus. So I moved on from my job, just been working full-time on the master's and graduating this month. So excited for the GIS opportunities ahead. See if I can. So I set out to answer the question of, does walkability show to be tied to obesity? Where redlining comes into that is that some of the literature that I came across showed neighborhoods which suffered from redlining were nearly twice as likely to have poor health outcomes and be exposed to a poorer walking environment. Obesity in the built environment and redlining are the three main variables of particular interest to this study. Ultimately, my interest lies in obesity and its relation to walkability for Cleveland, Ohio. And a short explanation of redlining is that it was a discriminatory practice that negatively affected minorities in the 1930s. There was a government organization at the time that decided who could get loans and financing based off of demographic composition of the neighborhood that they resided. So the objectives are simply stated on the slide, and the goals are built into the objectives. In the process of learning more about spatial statistics in fall one, ultimately, after many iterations with help from my advisor, I identified which regressions to use. And I arrived at a Pearson's R correlation for my objective 1, and 2 bivariate regressions for objectives 2 and 3. The variables used for the regressions are listed in the top right of the slide as a reference. So during my lit review, I found some conflicting articles about the relationship between walkability and obesity. Obesity has been on the rise nationally over the past 2 decades, and there's a consensus that physical activity can help mitigate obesity. So those who reside in neighborhoods that are more walkable are less likely to drive or even own a vehicle. But there lies the question, did they choose to live in that neighborhood because it's more walkable, or do they choose to walk more because their built environment happens to be more conducive to walking? So current residents of neighborhoods that were historically redlined are more likely to have poor health and have been shown to be exposed to lower quality walking environment conditions than non-redline neighborhoods. So this is a broad stroke of each method used to complete the 3 objectives. I can say that finding and preparing the data for analysis was the most time-consuming, and that this is a living research paper as I have more work to do beyond the information cutoff of this presentation. Total number of census block groups studied in this paper was 432 within the Cleveland metropolitan area. These are the sources of data used for this capstone. There were 3 main, which are listed on the top, and 2 supplemental at the bottom, which were needed for data pre-processing steps, the 2 additional. Disclaimer about the data. Was only available at the vintages listed, so it wasn't a perfect scenario where, say, 2024 walkability index scores could be used against 2024 obesity data. And I'll get further into the data in the next few slides. So this slide is an explanation of how the EPA compiles the National Walkability Index. The Walkability Index was the highest resolution of the data used in this research, and it was already available at the census block group level. So luckily, no pre-processing was necessary aside from filtering and selection of the Cleveland metro area CBGs, census block groups, sorry. The walkability scores can be interpreted as 20 being the most walkable and 1 being the least. The EPA breaks it out into 4 categories, but just knowing the range of 1 to 20 is what's important for this study, because I didn't use the categories for my data. This slide gives an explanation on the factors that go into the obesity data from the CDC. The data needed an aerial unit conversion in order to be used with the walkability index data. So note the data is from 2024, but so the CDC, they create a composite projected obesity percentage using the 3 factors listed on the second half of this slide. So it's data from varying years, but they compile it in 2024. So the obesity data was available in a point centroids CSV format, which I needed to join to the census tracts before it could be re-aggregated into census block groups. Apologies on the second half of this slide. The bullets for redlining data should have made its way to the next slide. But on the right is just a little kind of graphic of the process for Esri's aerial interpolation layer to polygons. So the redlining data, so if you notice the map on the right, contains geographic data, which is georeferenced from hard copy maps, which were made in 1939. The redlining data first needed retrofitting because the enumeration units were very dated and different to some extent than modern day units. So the next slide will explain the process further. But subsequently, the ordinal redlining grades of A, B, C, or D needed to be coded as integers in order to run the bivariate regression. So the 1939 units, they didn't align with current day units, as you might imagine. So I had to come up with a way to retrofit them to modern day units, which I'll talk about on the next slide. This is a sequence I went through for converting the 1939 redlining data to current day census block groups for use in the regression with the walkability index score. The above sequence was an example for redlining C, but I went through this sequence for all 4 redlining grades. And there's a graphic depicting the CBGs, which had been now converted from the 1939 units to 2019 census block groups to be used in the regression. So these are the results for objective 1. The trend line is not very telling. The negative correlation found between walkability and obesity of negative 0.08 initially had me feeling good to some extent that there was indeed an inverse relationship, which was, though significantly significant at the p less than 0.01, a negative 0.08 correlation is very weak and not very helpful. So for objective 2, the regression of walkability is the independent variable and obesity is the dependent variable. The R-squareds were very low, so we're looking for an R-squared closer to 1. But the beta coefficients for walkability index of negative 0.229, meaning that 1 unit change in walkability score results in a 0.2% decrease in obesity, which is it's a very minute change, though statistically significant. These are the results for objective 3's regression, coded redlining scores, the independent variable, and walkability index scores, the dependent variable. Grades C and D were statistically significant at predicting walkability. However, the beta coefficient for redlining grades, for example, 1 unit change for the D grade would result in a 0.8 increase in the walkability score. So conversely, a 1 unit change in the C grade would result in a 0.6 decrease in walkability index. But as I said, the low R squared means the redlining grades were not good at explaining the variation in walkability score. So conclusion, the results showed a statistical significance, but they did not show to be reliable. I haven't included in this presentation the QQ plots, but there is room for improvement to achieve further data normality and handle further outliers. I can't say with absolute certainty that my results are final due to remaining outliers in the data that were noted in my final chop of the my paper before the presentation. But some final notes, there's still more to be done in my study, rerun some tests for normality, and some notes I got back in my final paper suggest I hadn't fully achieved normality with my obesity data, which may have prevented further conclusive findings. A potential that was suggested by my advisor to finding different measures of walkability, potentially to try use and regression and correlation with obesity data once that obesity data is achieves normality. Could include also producing organic data for specific to Cleveland, which on my own, like say, grab it from imagery or just go out and do some surveying, could build out a walkability measure that would include number, length, and condition of sidewalks and pedestrian passageways, and see if I'm getting some more compelling results. But yeah, ultimately, I'm gonna have to go back and do some further tests for normality. Here's my references. Additional references. And the final page of references plus the RStudio libraries utilized during the process of this paper. Any questions are freely available.
Okay.
Sharing.
Thanks, Evan. Good job.
Yeah, thank you. I think I shot.
Looks like Marcella might have a question.
Yes, if I can say it this way. Evan, nice work. I am just curious when you mentioned at the end that there are probably, I agree that maybe looking for a different way to measure walkability. If there are studies, if you notice that if there are studies already using all the metrics that we use, like that we track with the watch sometimes, like if that information is already used for this type of studies, I'm curious.
Personally, in my lit review, I hadn't come across those papers. Maybe it's because I was looking for like a more specific, kind of niche information. But I think that would be really useful. I mean, I myself, I am a big Garmin user and advocate, and I use an app called Strava, and it's it tracks anything and everything I do. Whatever I want to share with it, it's got the GPS. So no, I hadn't ran into that, but I think that there would be definitely that would be a way to gather information because it's out there. Like they have heat maps of the different roadways or passageways throughout cities that I could do some kind of conversion on or something or other in order to identify, maybe where people aren't being physically active or walking or running, in certain neighborhoods. That would be a good.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned Strava, like some people is willing to contribute that information, so that would be interesting.
Yeah, it's out there, and it's pretty Strava. I don't know how publicly available it is, but I know I can go grab all my information and I can see the heat maps of people in my area, but I don't know for sure. Yeah, but it'd be interesting to be able to convert that. Let's see. Okay, so Michelle Zeiders, she said redlining also affects many other health outcomes. Redline neighborhoods often have limited access to healthcare, healthy food options, clean air, and safe spaces for physical activity, which contribute to higher rates of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and other chronic conditions. Have you considered these in your research in addition to walkability? I considered those and everything, but yeah, in the process of narrowing everything down, I wanted to look just specifically at the built environment, walkability measures, and their kind of effect on obesity and the relation anyway between them. But yeah, as I was doing my lit review, I came across a lot of that. Access to healthy foods in those neighborhoods and things of that nature, and how that can affect negative health outcomes.
I have to unmute myself. So I've got a question while we wait to see if anyone else does. Have you thought about writing this up in a paper for publication? I know you're probably a little disappointed that you didn't find results that you were perhaps hoping for, but it can be important to share, the results, even if you don't find what you wanted. So I don't know if you thought about that.
Yeah, I have thought about that, and yeah, it can be a little discouraging going through the process and not finding maybe the results you're expecting, or not being able to recreate, or you're seeing some other papers that have found that, and not being able to recreate it yourself. So, but I understand the importance of going through the process and whether or not you find anything in as far as correlations and in your regression, being able to be a good predictor. I'm not 100% sure, but definitely I want to go back in and find get the KS test to come back as normality in my data. I was using a package called RStatics, and it helped me identify outliers. But looking at the QQ plots in my final paper, Dr. Kessler let me know that I still hadn't fully achieved normality. So. But yeah, as you said, I'm gonna investigate it, because 870, that's part of the final discussion piece, is looking at maybe presenting at a conference, or and so I'll pursue it. And right now I'm a free agent, as I said in my opening. I'm actually not currently working, and this has been my full-time job. Been getting my master's over the past year and a half. So I very well might go down the research route with GIS.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good. Other questions for Evan?
I don't have a question. I just have a comment about the GPS data. There's out there for purchase, or maybe download, GitHub, check for something called cell phone probe data. It's an anonymized general data set that's probably a raster or just a web tile, and you can overlay that with your geometry in your road or sidewalk or whatever. Just saying, it's out there.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks, David.
look into the cell phone probe. Yeah.
Okay, will do.
Thanks, David. Okay. Well, again, good job, Evan. Best of luck in continuing on with the rest of the work you want to do on that, and also finding work in the field. Okay. That will take us to our next presenter, Gwen Bonner. Gwen, are you ready to share your screen?
Yes, I am. Let's see.
Might need Evan to unshare first.
That's going to be a task. All right, here we go. Wait, hold on. Let me move it to my other window. View. All right, having a senior moment here. Oh, we're good.
I
There we
think
go.
you can
Oh, there
see
we go.
mine, hopefully.
Yeah, we can.
See if I
Yeah.
can start it. Okay. Okay, so hi, I'm Gwen Bonner, and my advisor was also Fritz Kessler, and I will be presenting the development of the Heavy Equipment Transporter Possibility Tool. And give me a second, because I want to minimize the faces, they're blocking. Okay. Okay, so the big picture. So Or what am I talking about? For a heavy equipment transporter, I am referring to multi-axle transporters, vehicles that have multi-axles and carry thousands of pounds of weight. And they might also be oversized loads where they're very wide and have trouble navigating smaller roadways and turns and things like that. So I wanted to go ahead and create a tool, and I primarily use Model Builder and ArcGIS Pro. And I wanted this tool to help users easily navigate and identify roadways that their transporters can traverse. So this will just ease their analysis and help them figure out their final site selections, and basically just have an easy methodology to figure out what roads can my transporter can actually navigate. So the main things that I considered were slope or the incline in the elevation across the roadways, and then bridges and speeds given the weights of the transporters. So I did a step-by-step approach in Model Builder within ArcGIS Pro, and I took each piece step by step through there to try and create this tool. So with starting this whole initiative, I did look through some scholarly articles. There wasn't anything that directly related to what I was trying to build, but I did have some similarities. For example, Osegwenda, he had a very good workflow for truck navigation. So I tried to follow some of that, and you could see his outcome in Figure 5 in the middle of the screen, where he had an origin point and a destination point, and his truck had to go around the loops where the loops were too tight for the turn radius. However, for my project, I'm not having a destination point. I will only have an origin point, and I want to see where my transporters can possibly go from there. So that was the main thing when I was looking through scholarly articles. Most people have an origin and a destination, and like when you put in your GPS, you have a destination. So a lot of the articles are based on where am I going, and they give me a route. So my tool will give you several different roadways that you can possibly go. Another article I found, which was just interesting, was military related. So they had UAVs and their associated truck that is used to collect the UAV. So the UAVs can't go too far away from where the truck can travel. So they also had a route tool for their trucks. While this was interesting, it still didn't directly relate to what I was doing. However, my idea for my project is military related, and I had questions on building this tool within my work environment, so that's kind of where the idea came up. So for purposes of this project, because I'm on a public computer, my personal computer, on public data, I went ahead and tried to create a test scenario. So I chose wind turbine transportation in North Dakota. I chose wind turbines because they're large and very heavy. And when I was researching, I actually found that wind farms are very prevalent in North Dakota. And I found that Geronimo Energy actually produces the wind turbines, or at least parts of them. So I went ahead and created an origin point just within ArcGIS Pro based on their geo coordinates, and I used that as my start point for my test scenario. And the reason I created this test scenario is because to get the development working, I needed something to input to test in my step-by-step approach. Additional data that I decided to use was elevation rasters. So I found that Earth Explorer, the GTopo 30, actually has a digital elevation model across the entire world. So I think there's like 34 rasters that cover the world. However, I went ahead and just downloaded the ones that cover the United States. And then next, I went ahead and found the Federal Highway Administration roads. this actually took a lot of deep diving because I found a lot of road shape files from North Dakota, but I want the tool to be usable for the United States, ideally worldwide, but I think the United States is more achievable. So I found the Federal Highway Administration roads was actually better than trying to narrow down into North Dakota. So these are actually interstate highways, state highways, and major artillery roads. So I thought this was the best data set for roads. And then I also found the US Department of Transportation bridges layer, and this is also a feature layer, and it covers the entire United States as well. So to start, I went ahead and went to the Earth Explorer and downloaded all of the digital elevation models, and I bulk imported them into Model Builder, and then I mosaiced them together. So I went ahead and did that, as you can see in this. Again, I just want to mention, you'll see little pieces of Model Builder as I did it step by step, just to make sure each piece would work. So I mosaicked all of the rasters together to make one giant raster. And then I went ahead and clipped it to the boundary of North Dakota. So the user will be able to put in their boundary extent as their parameter, and all the rasters will already be in there, and then it'll just clip, and then it'll output by running the slope tool, and we'll get a % slope. So here is the clipped digital elevation raster over North Dakota. And then here is what it looks like after the slope is given, the % slope tool is output. And here's just some information that I found trying to find some relationships between the transporters and elevation. So when I say % slope, that's what I decided to run in my tool. So for every 100 feet across, you're going 10 feet up. So that's 10% slope. So the highest slope in North Dakota is actually underneath about 8%. So for every 100 feet across, the highest slope is actually only 8 feet up. So that was very interesting. And that falls within the moderate slope type, as you see in this chart. So you'll see different speeds that I gave transporters if they're carrying very heavy, like approximately 100 tons of weight, that they can go if they're driving on a moderate or maximum slopes. And I want you to keep in mind the flat distances, because that's what I used later on in this development. So in general, the elevation causes issue with traction for heavy equipment transporters. So when they start going up a high slope, they need to go into lower gear and shift their transmission. And then the uneven weight distribution bears on the rear tires, and the pressure can cause tires to pop, basically. So those are some of the considerations for elevation. Next, as I said, I did a lot of research into the roads data for the United States, and I really liked this 2018 Highway Policy Information Roads. It actually provides server layers or feature layers for every single state. So I went ahead and downloaded, or I copied each link and I put them into the tool. So the user can select by attributes and then select which server layer that they want to use. So I thought this was very helpful, having this accessible to us. So here's where I clipped the roads to the state of North Dakota, and you could see what that looks like. And just to give you a little information on the fields, I put a link in here. I know you can't get to it, but they have a very good schema that's like several pages long on all the different fields in the attribute table, and it really gives you explanations for how these roads are, service and the pavement, the surface type, where they start and end, and a lot of information on them. So the blue lines are actually the interstates, and then it breaks down into freeways, principal arteries, minor arteries, and then local roads. So in this tool, I have it select by attributes where the service type is not 1 or 11. So this just eliminates roads that are not paved. And then I also have it select by attributes where the through lanes is greater than 1. So that just means it's not a 1-lane road or a one-way road. So we want our wide loads to be able to go on two-way roads or multiple lane roads. So that's just what you see here in the tool. So just the relationship between transporters and roads. If the surface is gravelly or not paved, it may cut the tires. So that's one of the issues. And then if it's not more than 2 times the width of the truck, it might the wide load might not be able to make it through. And then a couple of other issues are turn radius. However, I was limited in what I could do with what I had with the road data. So for now, I'm not putting that in there, but it is something I considered. And then drainage. So if there's inclement weather and rain, we also want to consider if there's proper drainage to prevent slippage. So for user input, I decided to have the user input the weight of their transporter. So if the value is greater than 80,000 pounds, or if the value is less than or equal to 80,000 pounds. So that is set as a parameter. And if it's true that it's greater than 80,000 pounds, then I have the maximum buffer distance from the origin point set at 370 miles. And that was from that table that I showed you earlier. And then if the value is less than or equal to 80,000 pounds, then the buffer from the origin point is 430 miles. So when I ran the tool and I saw the output, it wasn't quite what I expected. As you could see, the buffer from the origin point, which was Geronimo Energy set in Fargo, North Dakota, the transporter can actually go pretty much the entire distance of North Dakota. North Dakota's elevation is under 8%. So, 8% is actually more than ideal. There's no issues with transporters going on those roadways. So they can traverse the entire state. Additionally, I found little sections of roadways that weren't connected to each other, and I had issues trying to figure out how to get rid of those within when the tool runs. So I'll have to delve into that in a future iteration of this project. So I went ahead and selected the Interstate 94, which is the major interstate that goes from Fargo, North Dakota, all the way to the western side of North Dakota. And I went ahead and wanted to create an elevation profile, which I have done in my work environment before, and I feel like users really respond well to this because you can actually see how the elevation changes across the road. So here, once I select where the route number is 94 in my select by attributes, and I had to do this separately outside of the tool, I generated points at 15-meter intervals along the roadway. I added XY coordinates, added the elevation, and outputted it into a CSV and was able to display this in the chart. And then where the right side is Fargo, and then the left side is the western side of the state. And if you are not aware of North Dakota, there is more mountainous, I don't know what they're called, but it's like a Badlands area. So it is a little bit different elevation than the flat side where Fargo is. So I was just curious after I had everything done, and I was a little disappointed in the terrain and the availability for the transporters to go all the way across. So here's just a picture of Interstate 94 for you. So the idea for this project was also to have users be able to display this in a dashboard. So I used ArcGIS Pro dashboard just within our Penn State environment, just to show the on the left side, we have the digital elevation model, and then the slope is layered on top of that, and then users can toggle between the two. And then on the right side is the output of the roads and the buffer. And then here you can see the little road segments that I wasn't able to get away, and then just an image of a transporter. So this is just a test environment. It is not final by any means. So for takeaways, the buffer from the origin point was not my ideal. I originally wanted to use the service area tool, which would, from an origin point, it would highlight the roadways that a vehicle can travel given a defined distance. But this required a network setup, and I did not have this, so I needed more time to figure that one out. And then even that tool was an option because in my work environment, we actually use a bead and scatter. So the bead from an origin point and scatter along a roadway to see which roadways we can use. So when I take this project into my work environment, I will actually probably be using that still. So it's just a little difficult working within the school environment. And then future iterations, I would really just like to have it work with coders to try and get it more dynamic, and not just select a road, but actually show you a route. Additionally, as I mentioned, North Dakota is not as extreme as in elevation as other areas I've worked in with my work environment. In my work environment, I've actually seen where transporters can't go very far at all. So this was just an interesting outcome for this project. As I mentioned, I intend to work with coworkers and my workers to create the tool within my enterprise GIS environment in a new iteration and create user guide documentation. So for conclusions, just to kind of wrap up what all I talked about, I developed a method to assess possible routes for heavy equipment transporters. And this included factors such as elevation, road quality, and transporter weight to distance capability. This helps analysts save time researching digital elevation models, roadways, and the bridges, and the weights of all of that information. And then it also helps analysts save time researching the method on how to create a route possibility tool. Because at work, I was given a task to do this, and I was like, how do I do this? So if there's a tool out there and a guided documentation on how to use it and what's all in it, that would save analysts so much more time to present it and to do other work and analysis on it. Right now, the application is nationwide, but there's a goal for worldwide use. And just my little negative, it does lack dynamic inputs and displays, but that will hopefully be used for future iterations. And these are my sources cited, so pending any questions, that's all I have for you.
Okay, thanks, Gwen. Nice job. Do we have questions for Gwen? I was just going to say, I don't have experience with it, but I would think that the network analyst extension built into ArcGIS would probably help solve some of the problems you ran into and allow you to go further with this. But I think this is a good start.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and I was going down so many rabbit holes, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much more research I need to do than I had time. So I'll definitely look into the network analyst options.
Good. You might even, there may be some Esri classes on on that specific piece of software. That while you're still a Penn State student, you might be able to get access to them for free. So you might want to take a look quick
Yeah,
before
that
you're
would
a
be
student
great.
anymore.
Yes, thank you.
Looks like we do have something in the chat for you.
So Michelle says, after testing, are there other features that you would consider integrating into the tool or dashboard? For example, real-time traffic data, weather impacts, or integration with fleet management software? Yes, definitely. I would like it to be dynamic so the user can have their survey field so they can go ahead and input everything and the map would dynamically change. And then throughout the project and even in the proposal, both my professor and the classmates also mentioned real-time weather data. So I think that would also be an important factor to put into the dashboard and have it really user-friendly. So yes, thank you for the question.
Okay, well, again, nice job. Thanks, Gwen.
Thank you.
And just a reminder to the presenters, if you could throw your email address into the chat box so that folks can follow up with you if they want to, that would be great. All right, that brings us to our next presenter, Liam Paus. Liam, I think I saw that you're with us. Are you ready?
Yep. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Cool.
Can hear you.
Perfect. I'm not used to Zoom. Let me figure out the share screen. All right. Seeing the screen
There
here?
we go. Yep.
Great. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Name's Liam Paus. Excited to present my capstone project, which I'm titling Interactive Visualization of Fish Species Distributions Using User-Generated Content. So start with some background here. I work for a small startup called OnWater. We're developing an app geared towards anglers right now. And this app is pretty much trying to serve as like a personal guide to individuals, give them the information they need to go out and plan a fishing trip. So we recently added a new catch feature or journal feature. So every time a user actually catches a fish, they can plot that point on a map and add in various attribution associated with that catch. And if anyone's curious, feel free to click on that link and some more information on the company. So overarching goals here at the highest level is to develop an interactive web map to visualize this UGC data. So to leverage this proprietary in-house UGC data collected via the app. So I want to have, for the most part, an automation of all the script processes. As you'll see later on this presentation, every time we want to refresh the data on this map, it should be fairly easy and quick. Shouldn't be a very painstaking process. Number 4, I want to incorporate interactive features into this web map, allow users to really kind of explore the depths of the data, see different insights. Then finally, this is really to serve as a proof of concept for this company on how we want to leverage this data, how we want to visualize this data and analyze it moving forward. So from my previous research, it became very apparent that we are in a new era of VGI data, volunteer geographic information data. Everyone has computers in their hands these days, super easy to go out, collect points, submit them to whatever organization. And there are a number of individuals that are really capitalizing on this data. These studies down here, they'll like tap into the GBIF iNaturalist database with a ton of points. And they really did notice that there's a lot of bias with this UGC data, like one of them being observer bias, right? When there's a lot of, people living in one area, there's gonna be a lot of submissions in that area. And that doesn't necessarily correlate with, high presence of species, but high presence of observers there. So they're able to create these models that kind of, reduce this bias. But that being said, these guys got access to databases that are incredibly rich. My database right now is 1900 points. So it became apparent to me, I'm not going to be creating any crazy models here. This really shouldn't be a scientific analysis web map. It's just going to be used for the organization to, view internal insights on this data. So going right into the data section here, quick little visualization of the UGC points we have currently. You can see these clusters of people around Denver, Rocky Mountains, Pennsylvania. Quick little overview of the attribute table. Some cool stuff we can collect, like what fly pattern they used, the weather, temperature, the CFS flow. Some cool stuff here. And the second data I'm using is the HUC2 watershed, hydrologic unit code 2. This was developed by the USGS. It's pretty much like catchment areas for water here. So this is like the low resolution watershed map that they have. I'm also using HUC8, which is a much higher resolution watershed map. And then finally, the USGS NHD plus hydrology. This is just a network of, aerial and linear features for, rivers and lakes across the US. Not doing anything crazy with this layer. It's more for context on the map, as you'll see moving forward. So jumping into the methods here. The first portion is just going to be the Python scripts I created. So the first hurdle I needed to overcome was, getting into these databases and exporting the data. So, creating a class for database collections allows me to reference, in this case, the JS unwanted prototype and plug in the credentials. I can then pass that into my downloader and then pretty easily just use a basic SQL query here, like select all from poi.content. This was a test, so there's a little limit there. But yeah, very straightforward. Then I just download that data frame into a GeoJSON, and yeah, my point data is ready to go. So now it jumps into a little bit more of a messier situation here. So the current interface doesn't have any drop downs for the users. These are all blank slates that they can just type whatever they want in. So naming conventions for fish could be capitalized. It could be typos in there. It's super messy. This is one of the great things of the proof of concept where we realize this error in the interface, and we'll fix that moving forward here. But I found a Python library called Fuzzy Wuzzy, and it pretty much creates a score. If for this case greater than or equal to 80%. If it matches that, it's going to use that data and then fix it. So smallmouth bass, however it was named, will be named something more normalized here, and I can actually use that. I'm then going to filter these rows for the desired species. For this project, I chose just 5 target species here, being largemouth, smallmouth bass, rainbow trout, brook trout, and brown trout. Then finally, I wanted to bucket these into seasons. So one thing that was uniform is that we have a date time associated with these points. So I wanted to see, okay, like what type of species were caught in the fall, spring, summer, and fall. So I just bucketed these using Python. Now jumping into spatial analysis. So I'm using ArcPy for the Python library here. Up until this point, I've been working with GeoJSON data. ArcPy doesn't like that. I have to convert that into feature class format. And that was a massive headache here. Like you got to clean the GeoJSON data. If there's any null values in there, it'll throw off the feature class and won't work. So it's probably an overcomplicated script I created, but it works for now. Pretty much cleaning all the GeoJSON, converting to a feature class, running KDE, kernel density estimation, and then using this raster with the zonal statistics tool to join this back into the HUC8 layer. So essentially summing up the raster values that overlap the HUC8s and creating a sort of, assumed density for these species. And the output of that is going to look pretty much exactly what I have here in this picture for this Washington area in coral pleth symbolization. So then I wanted to create some summary stats. So I want the user to see these big HUC2 general regions, click around and say, what's the count of the total species in here? How many users in the Missouri region are catching smallmouth bass? What are the top, fly patterns that they're using, et cetera? So just using, very basic spatial joins. Yeah, I got through this process here. About, I don't know, a month or so from the deadline, I realized that a full map forward approach wasn't quite enough, and I wanted to have some charts built into here. And I realized, okay, I'm going to have to generate some CSVs to reference in this web map to work with these JavaScript charts. So I just did a quick metric calculation. So again, just simple joins here. I could find the average lengths, temperatures, water clarities, rivers, et cetera here. In what I'm calling the summary statistics or species metric section. And you'll see those moving forward in the results. And then onto the automation of the Mapbox tile set. So I'm using Mapbox for the tile set conversion and processing here. So moving the data into some sort of format that I can reference for the JavaScript web map development. I have some experience with Mapbox, so it was the easy choice for me. Python works in with Mapbox quite well. They have like a CLI library here. So first you can, upload that and process that vector, what I'm using here. I'm not doing rasters. You can, process that data, upload the data, then publish the data. And it's pretty much automated to this point. I can just reference a folder, look through all the GeoJSONs and work through one by one, processing, uploading, and publishing all these. And this is an example here of what it looks like in the Mapbox Studio interface for the UGC point data. So all that being said, there's a lot of functions I would have to run one by one. So I just kind of consolidated all these into one, final function where I can just run that whole thing, and then it goes, one by one, triggers all these different functions, which pretty much encapsulates the whole Python geospatial processing, cleaning, and then Mapbox upload. So data's ready, good to go. Time to start building the web map. So I'm using the React JavaScript framework here. It just seems like to be the cleanest approach. So first, I kind of see this being broken down in 4 sections. I need to load the map layers in, being the UGC points, the choropleth polygons, the HUC2 polygons, and then finally the NHD hydrology layer. From here, I need to get click functionality working. So, when users are exploring this map and clicking on features, it needs to draw the attribution. And then I need to build these interface components that display the attribution. Then finally, the UX, user experience functionality, just being pretty much as smooth as it can be. So for example here, base map selector, you can go ahead and choose 3 different base maps. A toggle here for the seasons for UGC points. For this case, I'm looking at winter and spring seasons for all these desired species. And then you can go down and adjust your filter here, uncheck whatever species you'd like. I added in some map building and customization, just drawing lines and polygons. Maybe someone in the organization wants to highlight a section. They can create this polygon, select this little, it's like a save map button here, and it exports as a JPEG. And then basic navigation controls, kind of industry standard. So going into some panels now, some of the components. This is the HUC panel. So when you generate that choropleth map, when you render on the map, the user can click on one of these polygons. The UI is not incredibly pretty here, but it kind of does the job. So I'm clicking on this. It's the Mid-Atlantic region. The average length for a brook trout was 6 inches. There's 39 brook trout caught. The average temperature catch, top fly patterns, top gear types. And immediately you can see here issues with our interface. The top fly pattern was nobody put a fly pattern in. So uncovering some faults here. POI panel, what I'm calling the POI panel, point of interest. When you click on a UGC point, it's going to show you all the attribution associated with that. So it's a smallmouth bass point, estimated length wasn't put in, measured length 14.5 inches. And something I want to highlight here is we actually have an AI model working for us right now. When you submit a picture, it'll actually try to, guess the best length of that. So measured length should always be here, estimated, not always. So gear type, fly pattern, season of catch, etc. Then finally, the hydrology panel. Very basic. Just click on a hydrology feature. It's going to render. And real quick, all these tabs are clickable, but they're not really functional to the best right now. This is just going to be expanded on, after this project's done. I keep planning on developing this web app. And Mapbox, when you put in a massive layer like this hydrology layer, you have to choose almost like a resolution for this. It looks really jagged now because this was the quote unquote free resolution. If I were to make this pretty high def, it would have cost like, I don't know, $400 for this upload. So avoided that. And then the species metrics. So this is the CSV portion I was referencing that I thought of like a month ago here. So for this example, let's click on a brown trout. You're going to select your HUC region. There's a lot of blank regions here, so I just went with full USA. You can select your chart type. So the area and bar charts are going to be for numerical data. Pie charts are for categorical. So I click on an area chart and I can look at the average length, temperature, and species count. So you can go ahead and select all these different species and this chart will update automatically here. And then for the pie chart categorical data, I added in one more filter for the season, and you can choose, all the fly patterns associated with that species. the water clarity associated, all the rivers. Potentially it'd be cool to see like what the most pressured rivers are for each region. And then you can also look at the gear type here. So I'm not going to give much of a narrative with these results here and just kind of go through these one by one, and you guys can just visualize these. So here's brook trout. And some of these are kind of obvious, catch more fish in the summer than winter here. So counts, average temperature, average length. This is really telling of where our user base is. Then moving on to rainbow trout. Again, heavy in the Rocky Mountain. It's kind of cool to see in the Pacific Northwest. I know a lot of people are into steelhead fishing, which is another name for rainbow trout that migrate to saltwater. The smallmouth bass here. With the bass, you'll notice it moving a little bit more into the south, which is kind of expected. And finally, largemouth bass, definitely more present in the south. So yeah, and in conclusion here, I think I was successful in developing this interactive web map. The biggest win here was uncovering the current data limitations. We really got to fix this interface and really standardize the data collection here. It's going to really serve as a foundation for future growth. And yeah, it tells us where our user base is, where are people actually engaging with this feature. And feel free, you can explore this web app if you want to. Feel free to click on this URL, email me any questions you'd like. And here are my references. So thank you, everybody. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Liam. Good job. Looks like you got a question in the chat from Marcella.
Let me open this up. on who the users. Sure. So the users for this web map really are going to be internal organization. I would never put these actual point locations in front of a general user base, public user base. That's just going to encourage hotspotting and resource extraction. Chloropleth maps, I think, are more appropriate for that. This is really just for the on-water employees at this moment. It could be tweaked out in the future moving forward. How do you define what information and functionalities included in your maps based on that? Yeah, so I chose some specific layers based on knowing that the organization is going to have the eyes on this for what I just said here. And I know we've been brainstorming for a while of how we want to leverage this journal feature. So that's where the metric section came into play. How can we leverage this data and potentially have like future business to business interactions, like pairing with fly shops and saying, in this region, these are the 3 major flies that you're selling here. So maybe amp up that stock. I hope that answered your question, Marcella.
Thank you. Yes.
You mentioned a Python module. I think you called it Fuzzy Wuzzy. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. It's a goofy name.
Yeah. So I was just wondering how well did that, come up with matching species, misspelled species to what, what they really should be spelled. Did it do a good job?
Yeah, I don't have any exact numbers, and I should have gotten those together to quantify the success of that, but it did a pretty damn good job. I'm not gonna lie. It was good for stuff like flies and gear types. When there's such a more bigger wide range, I think it's going to struggle a bit harder. But basic species names, it did a great job.
So do you provide the correct spellings of different fish and gear? Is that how it works, or?
Yeah, I have a list of target species here. So both for my filtering data and the Fuzzy Wuzzy, it references that list and goes through. So that could be plugged and played. That target list could be, changed up, and it could completely show a different picture in this web map.
All right. Any other questions for Liam? Well, nice job. Hopefully, the folks at your company will appreciate the app that you're building for them, and I hope it goes well.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, that brings us to our next presenter, Hannah Krumholz. There's
Hey,
Hannah.
everyone. Let me just share my screen real quick. Okay. So hi everyone, my name is Hannah Krumholz and I'm presenting on a web application, excuse me, for visualization and evaluation of water demand for the Coconino Plateau in Arizona. I'm having trouble changing the slide here. Sorry, let me present this a different way. This is giving me trouble here. Escape this real quick. Okay, sorry about that. Just a little bit about me. I work as a geospatial technician with a company called Westland Resources here in Arizona. And we're an environmental engineering and consulting firm. So in my role, I mostly create GIS products for our archaeology and our environmental departments, and those eventually get sent to our clients. So my project is for one of our clients, which is the Coconino Plateau Watershed Partnership, and they're a nonprofit organization. And they have a vision of ensuring an adequate long-term supply of water is available to meet the current and future reasonable needs while preserving the health of the environment on the Coconino Plateau. So where my project comes in is that the CPWP asked Westland Resources to create an interactive web application for viewing water demand data. So my application will aim to help the organization better visualize and interpret water demand data for the region. It will provide a tool for them to share with the public and all other stakeholders involved, including like government and state agencies, non-governmental organizations, and tribal authorities. And it aims to help them improve policy decision-making. So I laid out 3 specific objectives that the web map will itself cover. The first one being to show how much water is being used in acre feet per year at various locations within the Coconino Plateau. The second is to illustrate the water sources, both surface and groundwater sources that contribute to the demand. And the third is to show whether the water is used for municipal, agricultural, industrial, or effluent reuse purposes. And on the right, I included this image just to show you where the Coconino Plateau is within the state of Arizona. It's that yellow outline in the northern region. So in terms of previous research that has somehow influenced my project, I took a look at a few studies that had similar, terms that similar objectives, I'd say. So the first was a web-based GIS app designed to manage and present water resources data. They used open standards like Web Feature Service and Web Map Service and open source software, which I didn't elect to use because the client I'm making the app for, they have access to ArcGIS Online, so that was a more attractive option for me. But they did have a similar purpose with their study in terms of data distribution, accessibility, and presentation. The next study I looked at was a web app to make GRACE data, which is gravity recovery and climate experiment data, and groundwater anomaly data, more accessible to web users. On the right, there is an image of this app that I'm talking about. And so their app is for regional groundwater management, and it allows users to focus on an area of interest And I ultimately did take a regional approach as well with my web app so that they, when they initially open the web application, they see a view of the region of interest, and then the user is able to zoom into specific areas. So mine was similar in that way, took some influence there. And lastly, I looked at a web application called StreamStats made by the USGS. And it's a map-based web app that provides an assortment of analytical tools that are useful for water resources planning and management and engineering purposes. And it provides estimates of streamflow statistics. So where my web app comes in and is a novel and new idea is that it's a web app that addresses water demand in a region where water is very scarce in Arizona. So getting into the data of my application, my data is point data that I'm displaying in my web app, and it's for 63 different locations within the Coconino Plateau and just adjacent to it. As you can see, this is a snapshot of what part of my web app looks like. So each point location has a water source attribute, which is in percent of total demand in acre feet per year, a total water demand attribute in acre feet per year, and water use as percent of use of total demand. And just to quickly go over the water sources, as you can see in the legend, includes surface water, treated effluent, and then there's 4 groundwater sources. They're in abbreviations here that the client is familiar with, but groundwater perched water bearing zone, the Coconino Aquifer, the Navajo Aquifer, and the Redwall Muav Aquifer. So to go over the methodology to display the data in the way that I elected to, I decided to use ArcGIS Maps SDK for JavaScript API, and I coded the app in JavaScript with HTML and CSS as well, and my data is stored in ArcGIS Online. So for symbolizing the data as the pie charts in the, I'll go back really quick. Those are all pie charts, those circles of each specific point within the region. I used a pie chart renderer, which is a feature that they have in the ArcGIS Maps SDK for JavaScript. And then I defined a visual variables parameter as well. Because as you can see, each point on the map is of a different size, and that size indicates the value of the total water demand. So the points are symbolized in 2 different ways, just so when the user opens the web app, they can get a visual idea very quickly of where there is greater demand than other places, excuse me. And excuse me, the associated code snippets for the pie chart renderer and the visual variables are included as images here in that first image, and then that smaller one as well. So next, for the list and zoom to function that I added to my web app, I used a query features and a sort method to create the list, and then the sort method was to sort the list alphabetically so that it would be easier to find the area of interest. And then I initiated an event listener so that when an item in the list is clicked, it zooms to the area of interest, and then a pop-up template as well, so that when that area of interest is zoomed to, then a pop-up comes up with associated information, additional information. Just in terms of updating this web app, I decided to show only current water demand data because that is what they wanted to see. Initially, I thought maybe I'll show some historic data, but that wasn't really of interest. So when the time comes that there is new updated data, I will just manually update that in the code and change out that URL. In terms of my process of getting user feedback, I initially created a draft of what I thought they would like to see, and I sent it to the client, and then they gave me some feedback to make some changes. So this is a full image of what the web app looks like when you're in it, and this is my result basically. So just to go over the thematic layers I've included besides the water points, which I've discussed. There's obviously the Coconino Plateau boundary in black, and then I included some other layers just for some context, which are lakes, streams, and springs. So again, each point, each pie chart point tells you where the water source is, and then also what the water demand is. And then the other components I included are zoom in and out buttons. I included a base map toggle as well so that they could see streets if they preferred that over the topographic background. I also included a home widget so that it's easy to return back to the initial zoom extent. And the legend, of course, to show what the layers are. And the scrollable list on the right there. And then, of course, the pop-up template, which I include an image of what the map looks like when you click on an area, it zooms to that area, and then it gives additional information on what the actual value of the total water demand is, the surface water source, if there is any, and then the percentage labels indicates what the water use is, and it's abbreviated, but this indicates that it's 100% municipal in this case. So to conclude, in the right, I provide an image of the Grand Canyon just because that's a very famous landmark that is within the boundary of the plateau. But my web map has met the 3 objectives which I set initially, which are to show how much water is being used in acre feet per year at various locations within the Coconino Plateau, to illustrate the water sources, both the surface and groundwater sources that contribute to the demand, and to show whether the water is used for municipal, agricultural, industrial, or effluent reuse purposes. And the web app will help employees at the Coconino Plateau Watershed Partnership to better understand and analyze water demand data for the Coconino Plateau region. And it will be used as a tool to share with other stakeholders, as I said earlier, like government, state agencies, tribal authorities, NGOs, to advocate for improved policy decision-making on preservation of water resources. So that's my conclusion. Here are my references and available to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. Nice job. Are there any questions for Hannah? So I'll go ahead and ask, how often do you see yourself updating the data used for the map?
I think they get new data every few years. So actually some interesting context is that my company's been providing them with just static maps up until this point, but with the new technology, they're excited to utilize this. But yeah, my coworker has actually been giving them some sort of similar product, but yeah, every few years, I would say.
And can you give an example of how this app has, I know you listed off some objectives that you met with it, but are there any specific examples of folks using it and it helping them answer questions?
Yeah, well, what I'm excited about is that it will be used by the client. Like I said, they are a nonprofit organization, but they have meetings, I think, every month where they meet with these other stakeholders and they try to, I guess, lobby for better policy decisions related to water preservation. So it will be used in that way. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I'm excited
does.
about it. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a new app that probably hasn't been used much yet. So, but that's a good venue for it to be used. It looks like you do have a question from Michelle in the chat.
Okay, is there any sensitive data that needs to be protected? Yeah, initially I thought all of this data was sensitive and that it would not be, they wouldn't want it to be shared publicly, but apparently they don't mind. So no, it's not sensitive data. Yeah, at least I think it will be directly shared with the public and with those agencies. So no to that. Is this published to a URL currently? Yes, I temporarily have it on my Amazon Web Services page, so I can include that URL actually.
I would think that you were able to use what you learned in GEOG 863 for this project. Did you
Yeah.
did you find that you had to go further than what we did in that class? Did you learn anything new that you could possibly share?
Yeah, that class actually definitely inspired me to use the API that I used because I had experience with it already and they have access to ArcGIS online, so it's kind of an easy decision for me in that way. Yeah, I definitely, the coding involved a lot of troubleshooting and just trying to get the data to be displayed in the way that I wanted it to. And I guess I would say that the most challenging or difficult obstacle was getting these points to be displayed both where the pie charts signify each water source and as different sizes. Like it was difficult for me to figure out that part of it. So
No, you did a good job with that symbolization, conveying a lot of information there. So okay, well, again, nice job, and we'll move along now to our next presenter, David Tetton. David, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Can you all hear me well?
I can hear you and I can see your slides, so you're all
Okay,
set.
cool. All right, hello everyone. My name is David Teton. This is my project. Was the longest running music festival of all time, a boys club, a demographic spatial analysis of the Vans Warped Tour in Los Angeles, Washington, and Orlando in 2010. Just a little bit of a background. I worked as a geographic analyst for Here Technologies for 9 years. My expertise is in navigation. I wanted to do something a little fun and completely away from my skill set because I, quite frankly, over that part, I just got a job with NV5 as an associate team lead. I'll be leading a team working on NOAA coastal restoration projects. Also, in between my time at here and my recent acquisition of employment, I've been working with the Warped Tour as a volunteer through the Esri YPN network. I also worked for them as a runner for 6 years because my previous career in GIS, before GIS, I was in the music business. Kind of fun stuff. So let's get started. Okay, so as I said, the Vans Warped Tour is the longest running traveling music festival of all time. It brought a variety of music genres associated with DIY punk culture, extreme sports, and activism, with nonprofit organizations and a wide global geographic audience. However, we're only looking at these 3 dates because we got to narrow the scope here. So geospatial research into business and cultural analytics into traveling music festivals is few, although there are some that we'll go over here, and the basis of this research question is based off of research that I read during the exploration for this project. Let's go through the goals and objectives. The objective is to examine how spatial analysis using spatial autocorrelation and demographic data from the Census Bureau can uncover age-specific spatial patterns in relation to the attendance of the Warped Tour. So I know that's a long one, but try to take that one in as we'll go through this. 2010 particularly marked the peak of the festival's popularity. It's also in the middle of the timeline here. It actually came back this year, and that's the reason why we're choosing these 3 locations. And they were excited to see this today as well. So just a side note. So we're going to research the question, can the Warped Tour be characterized as a boys club, even though we have evidence to suggest from the attendance records that predominantly females attended the tour. And this is a breakdown of from them, actually given to me, of their historical attendance by groups. However, we're really only going to be looking at the age and gender segmentation of this. I chose to narrow that scope a little bit here because it would be too difficult to navigate in such a short amount of time. So, but what you can see here is that the age groups, mostly the 18 to 24 range, and also the female percentage is roughly 60%, male at 40%. And we do have some inkling of a non-binary identity in here. Keep in mind that was probably collected in the later years of the tour. It's not something that was collected previously, probably since 2015. So anyways, so let's get into some previous research. There is a wide range of literature that examines cultural, environmental, and spatial impacts of live music. However, most of it's qualitative. However, one of the most important ones that's only been specifically written is the Warped Tour Boys Club, an analysis of the representation of women in alternative music. Now, this is a paper by Heinz that she argues the exclusionary nature of the festival, especially regarding women's experiences at Warped Tour. And she emphasizes the need to explore the gender disparity, which is what we're doing with GIS here. I am not refuting her claim, or this is not an argument against her. I tend to personally agree as a bias point here. So the purpose here is to explore this question quantitatively with spatial autocorrelation surrounding key venues to add additional context to this research question. There's also a lot of research around music festivals and how they contribute to sustainable ecosystems and urban centricity and things of that nature. The UN has a new urban agenda, which Vanderhoeven and Hitters goes over, where they say the densities of these cities provide good conditions for creativity to thrive and for people with similar taste to cluster and form scenes. And that's exactly what, if you ever went to one of those things, that it's kind of one of those things. It's a scene. Let's get into some modern stuff here with geospatial. Wang and Zhu, they have this is very new stuff. Open data sets based for profit-based music venues. They're using spatial autocorrelation with Global Moran's eye for spatial aggregation pattern discovery of cluster-based rank modeling. It breaks down the population of the surrounding areas into clustered areas to provide context. The methodology here kind of sprung me in the direction of spatial autocorrelation. So for this, so even more so, we exploring the variations in U.S. rock concerts. This one is related to restaurants and leisure establishments and how music venues kind of feed into this economy, and actually that music venues promote local businesses and can create conditions for them to thrive. And they have absolutely proved this actually kind of with this huge giant data set using a geographic weighted regression model. It's pretty cool. So let's get into what I'm doing now. It's not as fun. So proposed data and methodology, the Warped Tour venue data point set, it is the comprehensive set that was built by myself and the Warped Tour creators painstakingly over months. It's just a feature class geodatabase with the points of 1,038 festival dates. I also needed some census data. So I obviously combined the ACS table and the boundary lines for this. I had to generate these drive time polygons within a 30-minute driving distance of the Warped Tour, because that was the average distance that someone traveled to one of these. However, it's very common for someone to travel 2 hours. So let's just keep that in mind when we're going through this, that, you know, there could be different levels of abstraction here, and the limitation of the tool set we're using, we need to keep it to a smaller area. So, because it would, too much area would make the results all wacky and not reliable. So also I have an attendance database that was given to me by Kevin that it's incomplete, but it does have the 2010, 2011, 2012 stuff. We're just using 2010 for this. I wanted to use more, but we had to keep the scope a little bit limited here. Okay, so as I said before, we're doing spatial autocorrelation as our methodology here. Little Moran's eye, as you know, is a measure of overall spatial autocorrelation for a data set, whether a pattern is clustered or dispersed. The type of one we're going to be doing is a LISA method. It's a form of local spatial autocorrelation, and specifically the flavor of the Ansel local Moran's eye, which is a statistic for each observation showing whether it's part of a cluster of similar values, high, for example, low, spatial outlier, high-low, or low-high, if you're not familiar with it. This is the overall workflow chart I did. I'm sorry for the U-shaped process flow here, but I don't know what I did with that. But basically, it just takes you through some of the data preparation that I did. I had to normalize these fields and calculate them based on the percentage of the population based on some advice I got, which was a better output. And it's, as you can see, it'll look more valid. Yeah, so I had an entire US data set for the ACS data for 2010. I had to trim those to the drive time polygons. Basically just what you see in the maps coming up is within the 30 distance. It'll be easy to determine. And then I ran a global Moran's eye for the output, just a general one for a bar chart, just to see if it was clustered or not. Obviously, we're looking at populated cities, so it's gonna be probably. So yeah, and then we go to the Ansel and local Moran's, and then run it on multiple fields for the gender and age. We're doing the segmentations of 15 to 19 and 20 to 24. And as you can see, these are the 4 feature classes that I outputted, and then we got the output. Okay, so obviously this is a really high Z-score, pretty clustered. So just keep going with that. It's pretty much the green light here, just to keep going with the data. Okay. So I'm going to flip through these kind of too, back and forth. So pay attention to the lower left-hand corner when I'm talking, because I did not put the title of the actual demographic in the top of the map. So, so here you can see the female 15 to 19 output. It's important to note that you can see very high clustering around these historic venues. The 30-minute drive time was actually taken from Norwalk, because this is a sample of the locations, and I just kind of picked a place instead of one venue, because there's, forest and Santa Monica Forest and stuff on that side, and it's not really important here. So as you can see, there's a high clustering of females in this area around the Warped Tour. If we switch to the males of this category, even without looking at a data table, you can see that there's more clusters of male around these venue locations. So the key finding in comparing these age groups is that both genders have more significant clusterings for this age group as the next age group, but it still appears that males have greater access around this areas. And also we'll get into the statistics of that actually in a bit. Sorry, I keep going back and forth. If it annoys you, just let me know. Moving on to the 20 to 24, you can see that it is definitely not as busy. The clusters are much more smaller, and there's a lot more outliers. It's peculiar because this is the age group, the female 20 to 24, that would have dominated the audience. So what that tells us is that this age group, even though it dominated the audience, that they had to probably more than likely had to travel farther than 30 minutes to go to these shows. So like I said, we ran these on multiple geographies, but in general, I think the historical attendance in this age group was, I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm on the wrong slide. They all look the same. So there's over 300,000 females in this area, and 6,937 came to the show that day in 2010. So you can say, definitely these isn't the audience per se, but it's their demographic that they're targeting. So, okay, so this is Washington, D.C. As you can see, it's not as cool and busy looking as the other ones. The 15 to 19 age shows a notable low-high tracts. These represent census tracts with a low percentage of females in the 15 to 19 age group. Notably, there are fewer clustered tracts for females compared to males in this age group. As you can see here, although it's really somewhat significant, really, as you can look at just from seeing them. The clusters of the census tracts are concentrated near the venues of the high, but the distribution suggests that a greater spatial dispersion over the DC metro area is probably more appropriate here. It could be reasonably inferred that males in this age group had better access to the venue. So now if we go to the 20 to 24 and the female and male age groups, we see an extremely high clustering of females in the 20 to 24 age group, which is indicative of the attendance. No surprise there. However, as a trend overall, this is really the only outlier of all of the maps that have a dominant female attendance, right, within the 30-minute drive time. So if we just take a look at this for a second. Yeah, you can see the male counterpart of this. There's 8,329 females that attended that day, and there's roughly 242,000 females in this body, in these polygons. And something that was unexpected, this is for the Orlando area. I think what happened was that my 30-minute drive time, it's like this stretch here especially, it takes forever to get through, and it was under construction for a long time, and I think that's why this came out smaller. But Orlando revealed this weak spatial clustering pattern, particularly for the age group of 15 to 19 in both genders. It kind of shows that we really can't really make any meaningful insights or conclusions from these two maps in this age group. There's one or two polygons here. But if we look at the next age group here, female 20-24, you can see there is some around, and kind of pretty much the same here. I think if you go back and forth, but just dispersed. Again, the Orlando metropolitan area is larger than a 30-minute drive time, driving scope, and a little help it suggests a wider area's need for the scale. Yeah, and let's go to the conclusions if we can. Okay. Right slide. Okay, so this was the table here that I had. This is just I've said these in each one of the slides. This is to kind of these percentages. I'm really sorry I stuck these in here like that. This is 2.13% of the 300,000, and this 1% is of a different number that's not on the screen. I'm sorry, but just overall, you can see that despite despite males having better access to the venues, females still attended in higher number. So let's kind of take this by city. In Los Angeles, males had more access to the festival. Stronger clustering around venues as compared to females. However, it was significant for the females, the representation, suggesting, just greater access for males. And Washington, D.C. demonstrated a different trend of low clustering dominated to the 15 to 19 age group near venues, and high clusters located farther away, indicating that the attendees in this group likely had to travel further to attend. Although females only had a slightly more access to the festival, it was not that much greater. So in Orlando, on the other hand, showed a weaker overall clustering, 15 to 19 age group. For the 20 to 24 age group that we saw, the significant clustering for females suggested a stronger attendance for females. But however, the general conclusion based on all of them, it was still that males had more access to these. So, okay, so let's answer the research question. Yes, the Warped Tour is qualitatively a boys' club. The performers were men, the athletes were mostly men. However, 18% of the performers were eventually females in the later years of the festival. But by doing these types of analysis, we can understand the dynamics of these and provide a clearer picture of the social cultural impact of inclusivity and the festival of this period by identifying the clusters of age groups around the venues, and we can draw meaningful insights about the demographic reach of the tour, the spatial accessibility of the event, and so on. And however, the evidence suggests that while women dominated overall festival, males had stronger localized presence around key venues. It's highly likely that the surrounding geographic audience of clustered targeted age groups around these venues were by chance. The Warped Tour didn't have any type of GIS planning, but they were successful in their marketing to attract these audiences. In 2010, the Warped Tour relied on drawing from a broader female audience and had to overcome more distance to be part of the cultural event. This could be a trend in the rest of the cities. I'm not sure. We could do that if we want to. But the women that attended this festival year after year contributed to the inclusiveness of this festival, and the experience suggests that they had to work harder to be a part of the boys' club, to breach the gender divide in extreme music and sports. That's all I have for now. Questions? I don't have a reference page because I didn't see it. Requirements, but.
All right, thanks, Dave. Looks like you've got a couple questions in the chat.
Oh, okay. Let me stop the share because I can't read them. Okay, good stuff, David. Do you plan on sharing these findings maps with the tour? Yes. So let's actually, Kevin saw them today and he was saying, oh, well, that's a fun little research question, but really what I could use this for is targeting future demographics. So like a lot of services that you can pay for to geo-target markets are zip code based. And if you have something that's more granular like this, you can say, I've got these census tracts that are in this zip code. I want to promote my show in this area, right, online. So yeah, they liked it. Interesting set of map results. One thought about the patterns. Did you consider normalizing the data or some fashion for the fact that the number of venues, possible venues, LA was 4 times greater than DC or Orlando? Okay, so those were historical places. I had to take the sampling of that one. There was only one, actually there were 2 dates in 2010, but you saw many dates. That was actually for the whole tour, just in that area. For the 25 years, I just took from the mean center because if you just pick one of these places, you can get a skewed result because of how diverse and complex LA County is. Hopefully that answered the question. Cool.
Any other questions for Dave? Looks like you got one from Ryan.
Oh, okay. Yeah. What types of venues, large stadiums, do these events take place in? Would the availability of those types of rooms affect the distribution of where the events happen? Yes. Over time, the venues were small. They were more of like a 10,000 cap. Now they're at, they were at stadiums like 80,000 cap places. So because, you had to have like a track for, BMX riders, multiple stages, and they set up and tore down everything in one day. Originally, I was thinking of doing like some sort of like transportation related, like storytelling behind this, and I had enough of it in my career, to be honest with you. And yeah, I think with the new ones that are coming up, you'll see that they're in very large places, and they're going to have a audience that comes from hours away instead of 30 minutes away.
All right.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Orlando's got no public transportation, so.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave. It's cool
Cool.
seeing somebody from your background using the technology in interesting ways. So thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. That's going to bring us to our last presentation by Thomas Atwood. Thomas, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
You go by Jay?
Yes.
Okay.
So, one second here as I figure this out. Sorry, I gotta figure out how to do the share screen right quick. Is it showing?
There we go.
Perfect. Hey, how you doing? I'm Jay Atwood. On my diploma, it'll say Thomas, but I go by Jay. My project's on the changing Arctic climate and its geopolitical impacts on Russia. A little bit of a personal introduction. I have 30 years combined Air Force experience, 26 of it in active duty, where I specialize in law enforcement, physical security, base defense, and emergency management. Back in 2021, I transitioned to the civilian service, where I now became the director of inspections and exercises for the 99th Air Base Wing here in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I oversee compliance inspections of subordinate units, emergency management exercises. My interest in GIS was sparked by my twin brother, who was a drone pilot for a small electric cooperative in Kansas, and he told me how my nerdy background and knowledge of maps, not as deep as I do now, kind of fit into this because his company used his data to build their maps and stuff. It inspired me to research different GIS programs, and I found this one at Penn State. I liked how the coursework showed me how to use GIS data to develop view sheds, which are imperative in defense planning and emergency management. And so, which kind of inspired me for this project of kind of merging my background in the military and now learning about GIS. Kind of what we're going to talk about today, just a project overview, previous research, my data methodology, results, and some conclusions based on my data. The goals of my project were to kind of see if there's data to correlate Russian military buildup in the Arctic with climate change data, and to do that, what I thought I would do was to analyze existing ice shelf data to validate that the ice shelf was in fact shrinking. We hear about it anecdotally through different media outlets, but to actually pull down authoritative data. to produce maps showing economic exclusive zones and maritime boundaries, to produce maps showing how the ice shelf changes are improving Arctic navigation, and then how that improves access to potential natural gas and oil deposits. And finally, just to kind of provide just some anecdotal analysis over the Russian military presence in the Arctic and kind of why and how and all that good stuff. So previous research. Climate change is disproportionately impacting the Arctic. Research has shown that temperatures in the Arctic have increased 2.5 times more than the worldwide average due to climate change. These findings were published in the Atmospheric and Oceanic Physics Journal in 2021 and confirmed by the United Nations Panel on Climate Change. Their research also showed that the ice extent has shrunk by 23%, and that will eventually cause a seasonally ice-free Arctic in the near future, projections as early as 2050, and a ice-free Arctic by 2100. This, the present day ice conditions in the Arctic requires specialized ships called icebreakers because of the thickness and the extent. As this ice extent shrinks and becomes thinner and ice-free, the need for these specialized ships will decrease. And then by that nature, it will improve the ability to these ships to navigate Arctic shipping routes, gain access to offshore oil and gas deposits, and reduce shipping distances. It's important to note that USGS data suggests that 1/4 of the remaining fossil fuels reserves are in the northern polar region. That equates to 40 billion barrels of oil. 84% of those are located offshore. All this has geopolitical impacts. Article 57 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea establishes economic exclusive zones for 8 countries in the in the Arctic. Those countries are Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, the United States, and Russia. With Sweden and Finland joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in the last 2 years, 7 of the 8 countries with Arctic exclusive zones or maritime boundaries are allied with NATO, with the exception of Russia. It's important to note that the Russian economy is heavily dependent on natural resources such as oil and gas, along with agriculture. Their economy is strained by recent operations in the Ukraine, which means that they're going to be more and more heavily dependent on their access to the natural resources to power their economy. The data methodology I used, I accessed NOAA's National Snow and Ice Data Center, which houses monthly data on the ice extents. It goes back as far as 1979 and goes as recent as November of 2024. And what I did is I used their data to average and compare the ice extent data since 1979. I also accessed the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency's data set, Open Arctic application. I don't know why I'm getting an echo. To get data on oil and gas deposits. I also, why is it? I don't know why I'm doing this. Sorry, I don't know why my it's going on autopilot here. The Flanders Marine Institute for the EEZ data, and then also the U.S. Department of Defense database on where military locations are located, and then also Army and Air Force tech data on 5th generation fighter range, which will come into play here in a minute. Here's the results. By averaging the ice extent data over the last, since 1979, you can see that in 1979, the average ice extent was 14 million square kilometers and has reduced in 2023, which is the last year that we have a full year's worth of data, reduced down to 13.5 square kilometers. By averaging the monthly ice extent, we can get an idea of what is happening up north. My analysis, as you can see by not only the graph, but the trend line, shows that there's data to support the shrinking ice extent. So in addition to like having like the daily, the monthly ice extent sizes, the National Snow and Ice Data Center also houses layers for each one of these measurements. Three particular extents were of note. In March 1979, the monthly ice extent was the largest. Sorry. And what is this flipping? I don't know why it's on open. September 2012 is the smallest, and then a more recent one in 2024, shown in white. As the sea ice extent changes, so does the shipping conditions. Climate models, as I mentioned before, forecasted a spring and summer free Arctic by 2050 and year-round by 2100. But as you can tell by the current extents, that's already impacting shipping. So the map I developed here was using the NGA Arctic applications maritime boundary. What I did is I queried the 8 countries with maritime boundaries so that we can kind of see how in relation, how that's changing. I also downloaded their potential oil and gas deposits. Combining these 2 layers, what I was able to do is do an analysis of actually 3 layers, right? So what I was able to do was extrapolate the changes in the amount of natural resources that were available in 1979, November 1979 to September of 2024. And by calculating the geometry in the attribute table, I was able to show that in 1979, the amount of exposed oil and gas reserves covered an area of 124,000 square kilometers. And then in September of 2024, that grew to over 2.8 million square kilometers. With greater access to natural resources such as scarce as oil and gas, there's a motive to secure them. Both the United States and Russia have had a long military presence in the Arctic. The United States and Russia, one of the ways that militaries project power is through their fighter aircraft. Both the United States and Russia are currently transitioning from their 4th generation aircraft, which is like for the United States, the F-15. For the Russians, it's like the MiG-29 series, to the more 5th generation, which is the F-22 and the Russian Su-57. Based on data from the Air Force for the F-22 and Army's Training and Doctrine Command, both have a range of approximately 1,850 miles from the Arctic. And what I did is I used that to kind of determine how many bases each country has within that Arctic region, so that we can get an idea of how these countries can project military power in the Arctic. This analysis determined that Russia has 9 military bases within that zone, and the United States 11. Sorry. Um, Sorry. This map here shows joint military use in civilian airports. So as the geopolitical tensions increase between the United States and Russia, these are potential areas where military expansion could occur. If you look at it, so this data was confirmed not only by professional defense data, but it was also confirmed by a CNN article with satellite imagery. And this is the potential locations of future military expansion. Some of the conclusions I have based on my research is that climate change is definitely impacting the Arctic ice extent, as seen with this data and maps. The ice extent changes are impacting navigation and access to oil and gas reserves. As the ice extent shrinks, it's going to be easier to get to potential oil and gas deposits, which are desperately needed for Russia's economy. Russia is obviously economically motivated to secure these resources because they see NATO expansion as a threat. They're spending a lot of money in Ukraine, so they desperately need that money. And being that they're heavily dependent on natural resources like oil and gas, they're going to take action to secure them. They see increasing their military capabilities in the Arctic is vital to secure these resources and their economic future. That's kind of all I have. Is any question?
All right, thanks. Thank you, Jay. Questions for Jay? I could probably start. I saw one of your maps showed the increased oil and gas reserves that are now available because of the retreat of sea ice. And then you also showed a map of military bases that are in that same vicinity. But I didn't pick up, are you saying, do you know when those bases were built? Are they relatively new coming into those areas?
I can say from the U.S. data, many of those bases have been there since the 50s. Cold War bases, and however, getting access to that level, and it was really easy to access that level of data because the U.S. Department of Defense hosts military installation data on Esri's Living Atlas. Gaining more specifics on the Russian base is a little bit harder because obviously they're not as open source as the U.S.
Right. Looks like you've got a couple questions in the chat box.
No, I didn't include them in my report just for brevity, but I don't have them mapped out. I was kind of concerned about going over 15 minutes, so but I can get back to you. I have that in my notes. That's the only question I see.
There's a question from Michelle and Greg. I'm not sure which one you were responding to there.
Oh, sorry, that was Greg. As far as Michelle, I didn't look into the indigenous populations that most of the resources, or actually all the resources I looked at from the USGS data was based off of offshore oil deposits, which I'm not aware, based on my research, I wasn't able to find any like even in the United States, maritime claims for indigenous population, where they have exclusive use of certain areas for oil and natural gas.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Jay? Okay, well, that takes us just a minute past the originally scheduled time of 2:50. Thanks to everyone for coming in at right around the right times. And I want to congratulate everyone who finished up in this term with your capstone work. It's been a long road, and you deserve a big hand for finishing your work. Congrats, and I hope that finishing your degrees is really going to help your careers. All right. Well, with that, thanks everybody for coming, and take care.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks a lot.